we now look at this a little bit about the grand argument story that we mentioned. Grand argument story is when all of this stuff here is included, every little detail down to the last smallest element of character. But you don't always want to tell a grand argument story, but you still want to tell a complete story. If you just took one of these areas like mind, you could explore nothing but people's attitudes and leave out the activities, the situations of the universe, the manners of thinking, and just look at attitudes, and that short story would then be only 1/4 as much detail and 1/4 as long probably, depending on how you tell it, but it would be complete because you said this is the scope that I want to explore in this story. And the audience will then look at that scope and they'll be able to say, yeah, okay, as long as the author covered everything in here, then I'll buy that. It's a complete argument. But the biggest danger is that if you decide you want to add just a few little bits out of this other area, the audience is going to assume that you're trying to make a larger argument. And they'll start trying to put those pieces together, and they'll invest their emotional effort and time into working it out. And if you don't complete that larger vision, then they're going to feel that the whole argument is bogus because they think this is the argument, and they'll discount it out of hand. It is far better to satisfy your audience by limiting your scope and staying within it and exploring that in detail than it is to add extra details that make it more complex and bigger but not completed and make them feel that they were wasting their time because you didn't do your job as an author to make it complete. There's also another way, rather than just taking chunks like this, you could take levels. For example, if you're writing children's stories, let me move this close a little bit so that you can see this. If you're writing children's stories, then you might want to only use the top level and the second level down, which will deal with plot, and you might want to stay away from thematics. Or you might want to just only deal with thematics and not deal with the plot, not deal with the genre, not deal with the characters. Maybe you want to make your characters represent thematic considerations rather than the elements. You can do that. There's no reason why you can't represent different aspects of the story as characters or different aspects of the story as what's happening in the plot. It doesn't have to be that the types are plots and the elements are characters. But if you limit it in depth, then you end up making a complete story because it still has the breadth, but because it's not as deep, children of younger age can get into it and feel there's a complete exploration, but it doesn't go deeper than they're capable of resolving at this stage of development of their minds. So, by chopping things up that way, you can come up with a multitude of different kinds of stories, and we call it, when you take slices like that, vertical, slicing. And when you take them horizontal and take off pieces, we call it dicing. So by slicing and dicing the grand argument story, you can end up with any number of complete stories that you want to be careful not to go outside the scope and make it feel incomplete. But any number of complete stories of a smaller nature. So a story doesn't have to be a grand argument story to be good. It can be a small story and still be complete. And in fact, you don't even have to tell a story. Telling a tale is just fine, as long as the audience doesn't expect that you're trying to make something bigger. Because you see, when you tell a story, a tale is like a scanning line on a TV set. It's a series of scenes or sequences, and that's all it is, just experiences if it's one long line. But if you put it on a TV set, then each line has to do double duty. Each sequence, each scene is a mini tale. Those tales stacked up together eventually create a larger picture. And every single event that happens in that sequence or scene not only has to make sense linearly, but also has to do double duty by fulfilling its function as part of the larger mosaic. That's the relationship between the events that happen linearly in a tale. There's no other obligation. It begins, these things happen, it ends, it's proven that path, as long as there's no missing steps, as long as it's consistent. But if you want to tell a story, then you're going to need to make sure that it comes up to that larger view that says this is better or worse than all the other ones that might be, and it creates a larger meaning. Every single story point has to do double duty.